Number 5. The Conjuring. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, no doubt you know all about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famed demonologists with a storied career in investigating the paranormal and unknown. You probably knew as well that The Conjuring was based on real events, but how much do you know about the real story that inspired the mega hit? Well, just like the film, in 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. Almost as soon as they could start unpacking their things, however, they began to notice bizarre happenings around the home. It all started pretty small, just weird little things. Objects moving, a broom being found in a room different from where it was left. The girls would say that they'd see spirits floating around the halls, but you know how kids are. The mother, Carolyn, researched the house's history to see if there was anything that suggested it was a ground for spiritual activity. She discovered that the house had been home to one family for 8 generations. Not that scary. She also discovered that many members of this family all passed away under mysterious circumstances. Pretty scary. Now, just like the film, they learned at one point the house was owned by a woman named Bethesda, who was thought to be a Satanist and a witch. One of Perron's daughters thought that Bethesda's spirit threatened her mother's presence. And just like in the films, the Warrens found their way to the Perrons and performed a seance to try and speak to Bethesda and claimed they saw Carolyn Perron speaking in tongues during the seance. Now, where the movie differs slightly is that in the film, Ed Warren performs an exorcism and heroically saves the family and cleanses the house. But in the real story, the Warrens were sent away because the Perrons were worried about Carolyn's mental health. They also did not perform an exorcism, as Lorraine Warren said it wouldn't have been appropriate for them as they weren't members of the ministry. The Perrons stayed in the house until 1980, when eventually the hauntings started to go silent. This might be one of the few times a horror movie based on a true story had a happier ending than the real story. Love horror movies? Me too. Stick around at Top 5 Scary for more stuff every day. Let's creep on creeping on. Number 4. The Amityville Horror. Another haunted house story, and wouldn't you know it, another one attached to Ed and Lorraine Warren. If there was a haunted house in the Midwestern United States in the 1970s and they made a movie about it, well, by gum, those 2 names will come up a lot. They were very busy. The Amityville Horror has been made into a movie a few times, first in 1979 and again in 2005, if you can remember that terrible period when Hollywood was dredging up every single horror franchise and rebooting them terribly. Both movies are based on a real-life famous haunting, however, and while details vary between the films pretty wildly, let's see how they stack up against the original case. In 1973, a man named Ronald DeFeo slayed his family in a brutal crime, claiming that he had heard voices that had commanded him to do it, and there was some entity in the house. 13 months later, the Lutz family bought the house. The realtors had warned them about the house's grisly past, but it didn't bother them. You know how the housing market is. A friend of the family told them that it would be wise to have the house blessed, since there could still be evil inside the walls. After the family moved in, they described all sorts of paranormal wrongdoings going on. Green viscous slime coming up the staircases, voices speaking out to them, telling them to get out, flies all over the house, and the family even seeing wild things like specters. Now that's all pretty bad, but the film adaptations really take it up to the extreme. In the films, the Lutz family faces spirits directly, seeing ghosts. The father even gets possessed and attacks the family dog. Now, nothing this extreme happened in the actual haunting case, but there was a photo that was released that appears to show a ghostly boy walking across a staircase. But there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not it's legitimate, or whether or not anything involving the haunting was legitimate at all, as there are many who feel that it was faked by the Warrens and hyped up a little bit to try and make it a much more interesting story so they could sell books or movies. Well, real or not, it definitely worked, as the book was a smash hit and there have been dozens of movies since, meaning we're not leaving Amityville anytime soon. Number 3. The Exorcism. Now, The Exorcism is an iconic horror movie and legendary story adapted from a novel. Not many people know that the novel and the film were based on a real-life exorcism of a boy named Roland Doe, or so we think, as his real name has never been cleared up. Living in Maryland, Roland lived a quiet, sheltered life, relying on his aunt for company, a noted occultist, and fascinated with the spirit world. She gifted him a Ouija board at a young age. After his aunt passed, it wasn't long before the family home started to experience a series of strange paranormal events. Like it always does, it started a bit small, just objects moving around the house or water leaking from all the pipes in the house, but then eventually it started to ramp up. it seemed like Roland had become possessed. He started to fall mysteriously ill, and red scratches appeared all over the boy's body. The family was put in contact with the clergy, who suggested they needed an exorcist to help them. Now, unfortunately, although in the film, Regan only needed one exorcism, albeit a brutally rough one, Roland wouldn't be nearly that lucky. Roland was exorcised round the clock for weeks and weeks. Now, he never turned green and vomited up pea soup, nor did he ever twist his head all the way around, but they did report that he would growl gutturally in a voice that wasn't his. He would speak Latin, and even threatened the priests by saying that Satan had taken control of his soul. On one occasion, during an extreme exorcism, he broke free of his restraints when he was tied to a mattress and managed to slash at one of the priests using the buckle, similar to Regan attacking her exorcisers multiple times in the film. After weeks of battling, eventually like a miracle, Roland woke and said he saw a vision of Saint Michael and Satan battling for his soul, and after that, he was freed. None of the priests were slain like in the film, and luckily after this harrowing experience, Roland was able to live a quiet, normal life and tried his best to live under the radar, not wanting any more attention than he'd already had. After reading about it in a newspaper, author William Blatty was fascinated by the case and inspired to write about an exorcism of his own, which would then become The Exorcism. And then the movie was made, and well, the rest is pretty much history. Number 2. Annabelle. Another famous story from the Warrens' legacy. We knew we'd be seeing them again. Based around probably the most famous and recognizable haunted item in the Warrens' Museum of the Occult, Annabelle. The real Annabelle is a cursed Raggedy Ann doll that was one of the first cases the Warrens ever investigated. Now, the real Annabelle already looks pretty unsettling and isn't the kind of thing I would ever give to a child, but her Hollywood glow-up made her even more terrifying. The story of the film and the legend of the real Annabelle differ pretty greatly though. In the film, Annabelle is given off as a gift from a husband to his pregnant wife, whereas in reality, the Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nursing student, Donna, by her mother as a small gift. The film does feature Donna and her roommate Angie speaking to the Warrens at the beginning, describing their experiences with the doll. That's kind of where the two stories stop being the same and start differing greatly. The original story, Donna claims that the doll would move around their home, appearing in random places, occasionally having red stains on her no one could explain. She would complain that her and her roommate would wake up covered in scratches, again, no one could explain. They said they would find notes scrawled in red writing across the home, reading cryptic things like "Help us" or "Help Lou," the name of Donna's roommate's fiance. The most extreme thing any of them ever reported was that Donna's fiance claims one night while staying over, he felt something crawling on his leg, and when he looked to see what it was, he saw Annabelle on his leg and claims the doll leapt up at him. He woke up the next morning completely unsure if what he had experienced was real or not. Now from there, they contacted a medium to arrange a seance to see if they were dealing with something truly evil. From here, the Warrens were put in contact to help them and take Annabelle off their friends. While the real story is no doubt spine-chilling, the movie got a lot more dramatic, involving satanic cults, deaths, house fires, and a whole lot more. But still, I probably wouldn't want to spend any time near the real Annabelle, just in case. Number 1. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven was a master of horror. I don't think it is completely fair to call him a visionary and an icon of the craft, giving us not just one, but two legendary classic horror movie franchises, A Nightmare on Elm Street and the satirical horror movie series Scream. Freddy Krueger is larger than life as a horror icon. He's incredibly popular, appearing in several of his own movies, even coming into some of Jason's movies, starring in a couple video games as a playable character in Mortal Kombat and Dead by Daylight. A horribly burned dream-invading ghoul, manifesting people's worst fear and attacking them in a place no one can help them and no one can believe them. He's terrifying, but by gosh do we love him. It's no wonder Freddy's had such scary staying power. But I bet you didn't know Wes Craven was inspired by a real-life horror story for Freddy. Don't worry, there's no real-life groundskeepers that were cast into a furnace, at least I think. Wes Craven was reading the LA Times one morning and he read an article that pierced him and stuck with him. It was about a refugee family that fled to the United States for the fear of their lives. The son of the family was plagued by nightmares and said that he was too afraid to sleep. When he finally found himself falling asleep in the middle of the night, he was screaming and passed away during a nightmare. This spoke to Wes Craven deeply, who sympathized that he was too afraid to sleep and no one would listen to his worries, and saddened at the idea of something that would attack someone while they were vulnerable and away from the protection of supervisors and guardians. From that tragic story, Freddy Krueger was born as a manifestation of this horrible concept that affected Wes Craven so deeply, trying to conjure up the most evil thing he could think of. Since then, Freddy's become a pop culture icon and is not without his legions of fans, but few know the true story behind the iconic slasher. Number 5. Midsommar. So, first up on our list of the scariest movies is gonna be Midsommar, a movie that may hold the record for the fastest time I have ever seen something become a classic. I think Midsommar became a horror movie classic roughly 30 seconds or so after we left the theater. And there are some out there who knock on Midsommar for not being enough of a horror movie, but I would like to say boo on you. I think that's mostly bogus, just because it takes place during the day, and because like Hereditary before it, Midsommar is that nice kind of elevated horror that doesn't just get your hair standing on end and your spine all chilled, but also manages to get under your skin and start to pick away at stuff you didn't even know you were insecure and scared about. Just a bit after Ari Aster had traumatized all of us out of ever looking at a stop sign the same way in Hereditary, we got Midsommar, which will ensure I will never look at a bear the same way ever again. While Hereditary picked apart at the foundations of a crumbling family, Midsommar instead takes us into watching a friend group and a young couple getting torn apart, both metaphorically, which is scary in a very esoteric way, and literally, which is scary in a wow, that's disgusting kind of way. After a horrific, sad tragedy claims the lives of most of young Danny's family, she and her boyfriend find themselves growing distant from one another. Things look like they're gonna change when her boyfriend Christian invites her to a Swedish commune with his classmates. What looks at first like an idyllic vacation quickly unravels when it seems that commune is a Swedish word meaning scary pagan human sacrifice call, and Danny finds herself at odds with a new family that seems to welcome her grief with open arms. Midsommar contrasts gorgeous visuals of the Swedish landscape with some of the most stomach-churning body horror I've seen in a Hollywood production recently. Do you know what a blood eagle is, my friends? If you don't, do yourself a favor and don't Google that, okay? And if you do, yeah, well, you just know how horrible that was in this movie, eh? I figured we've all seen Midsommar. It's non-stop scares, but somehow, if you haven't, let me be the 1000th person to tell you you should watch this movie. If you like spooky cult movies, this is probably one of the best out there. Just, don't be surprised if you can't bear some of the stuff that happens in this movie. That's a little pun about a bear. Now, my friends, if you're looking for more videos about horror movies you should watch, maybe some scary urban legends, stuff about SCPs, aliens, and just about anything freaky, well, subscribe to Top 5 Scary, because we got all of that and then some. Stay scared, stay subscribed. Number 4, Incantation. Coming up next on the list is going to be Incantation. It's the most recent one on this list. It just came out, and I guarantee it's not like anything else you've seen, unless you're a huge fan of Taiwanese found footage cinema, in which case, yeah, it'll probably be pretty similar to that, because that's what it is. Right off the bat, Incantation invites the viewer to join in on it, with one of the characters breaking the fourth wall and directly asking the audience to say a prayer for her daughter, which I think is such a good hook to immediately get you into a movie. A little bit of audience interaction, and then forming the movie as a found footage horror movie made it seem that much more real. Like, you kind of forget that you're watching a production. It immerses you into the characters as much as a movie possibly could. A young woman named Lee Ronan reveals to us that years earlier she broke a religious taboo by spying on a secret ritual, and as such cursed herself and her bloodline. And when her daughter is born, she finds herself being haunted by a malevolent spirit. This movie is like a buffet plate of horror genres. If you like haunted house stuff, demon possession stuff, exorcisms, well, this movie brings all of that to the table and makes all of it gripping and horrifying. And if you like really inventive, metatextual, postmodern horror stuff, well, the framing device and the found footage elements really pump it all up, and I wouldn't dream of giving away the movie's twists, but it has some that you genuinely cannot possibly see coming that turn the whole experience on its head. And admittedly, maybe this is more me telling on myself for having a very Hollywood-esque kind of centralized North American horror movie palette, but it's very refreshing to see a story centered around people I don't see often in movies and a culture I don't see often in movies, somewhere I don't see often, making an already inventive script just feel that much more fresh, you know? Don't be afraid of the subtitles, and don't deprive yourself out of Incantation if you're looking for a great new cursed movie to watch. Just, if you want my advice, definitely say your prayers before and after watching, you know, just to be absolutely safe. Number 3, Killing of a Sacred Deer. Coming up next is going to be Killing of a Sacred Deer from Yorgos Lanthimos, who has one of my favorite names in cinema. I needed at least one really psychological horror movie on this list that I figured most of you probably haven't seen. Like all of Lanthimos' filmography, Sacred Deer is relentlessly weird. If you want to watch a movie that's going to leave you shaking, sweating, and asking yourself in your dark living room, what the hell did I just watch? then you're gonna love Sacred Deer, okay? A heart surgeon named Steven, played by Colin Farrell. He's got a perfect life, 2 children, a successful career, and a very, very strange relationship with a mysterious young boy named Martin, played excellently by Barry Keoghan. We learn that years earlier, Steven had operated on Martin's father, but failed to save his life, and since then has kind of taken Martin in and kept an extremely odd paternal relationship with the exceedingly strange boy, who seems determined to force himself into Steven's family by any means necessary. As Martin begins to uncomfortably ingratiate himself with Steven's children, their health starts to worsen in mysterious, paranormal ways that hospitals can't explain, and it seems like Martin knows a lot more than he's letting on. This movie feels like an actual honest-to-God nightmare that somebody filmed. It's kind of hard to describe. It doesn't really have jump scares. It's got next to no gore. There's like blood, I guess, but most of the horror comes from this unending dread, this creeping, unsettling feeling in the air that everything you're seeing is wrong. Every single line of dialogue in this movie does not sound like it was written or performed by a human being. I know that sounds like a bad movie, but everyone is performing so well that the atmosphere is like a mile thick. Everyone just talks in a way that's not in a way you expect or you're used to. It seems like everyone's from a different planet ever so slightly. It's so surreal, it feels like an extended dream. There's a scene where Barry Keoghan's character is describing how he and his dad used to eat spaghetti the same way, by swirling noodles around a fork, and it's a very innocuous conversation, but the whole thing around it is so chilling, it genuinely had me sweating. If there's anyone who thinks Barry Keoghan isn't gonna make a good Joker, please watch this movie and then come right back to me. This guy is so good at being a lunatic. This one is not gonna be for everybody, I'll be straight up. If you like your horror a little bit artsy, like if Midsommar and Hereditary totally spoke to you, Killing of a Sacred Deer probably will as well. But, you know, if you're looking for something with like a guy in a mask who's breaking through windows and pulling on Jamie Lee Curtis's ponytail, this might not be up your alley. If you're looking for something splattery and splashy, well, it might just leave you extremely confused. Number 2, The Ritual. Coming up next on the list is going to be The Ritual from director David Bruckner, part of the horror collective that contributed to the cult classic found footage movie VHS, as well as directing 2020's The Night House. The Ritual is one you can find on Netflix, and if you don't load it up after this video immediately, we're probably gonna have an issue. A group of college friends meet together after a shocking tragedy claims the life of one of their friends in a random robbery. Now, before the incident, they all had made plans to hike in the woods of Sweden, and let me just pause here for a minute. Is it a bit odd that 2 of the scariest horror movies made in the last 10 years involve a group of friends going out on a vacation to Sweden? If I'm learning anything from this list in contemporary filmmaking, it's that it's not nearly as welcoming as I thought. But I digress. The friends go to Sweden in their late friend's honor and discover that it is really not the best of ideas when things turn horribly wrong very quickly. Discovering an elk gutted out in the woods, they suspect there is a lot more out in those woods than just the wildlife. The Ritual is kind of like if the Blair Witch Project and the Wicker Man loved each other very dearly and had a beautiful baby and they let it play with Midsommar on the weekends. You get to watch a friend group at odds with themselves lost in the woods, deal with mysteries of a secret Nordic cult, and it's got lots of good, creepy, supernatural cult stuff, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'll say it's got one of the coolest monsters put to film in recent memory I can think of. I would love a statue of that thing. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot is going to be The Mist. Directed by Frank Darabont, who is probably the king of adapting Stephen King's works into films, having directed The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, and The Mist. Interestingly though, unlike The Green Mile and The Shawshank Redemption, which are both very accurate depictions of the source material, The Mist deviates a little bit. It's got an alternate ending which is way darker than the original story, but here's the catch: Stephen King actually says he prefers it, which has to be the highest compliment possible. If the guy who wrote the original terrifying story can watch the movie and say, you did a better job. He certainly didn't say that about Stanley Kubrick. If you don't know the plot of The Mist, like all Stephen King movies, it takes place in a small town in Maine when a massive thunderstorm has descended upon the community. It focuses on a group of ordinary people caught in a grocery store locked in as a mysterious mist starts to encircle the town, and strange creatures from beyond this world start to complicate things. This thing is very tight, focusing on what happens to normal people when put up against the most overwhelming odds imaginable, trapped with eldritch horrors threatening them just outside their little sanctuary of suburbia, and trying to protect your family from all the danger. It is tense as all get out. If you like monsters and creative monsters too, oh man is The Mist a treat. They hide them well, you know, in the mist. You never get too good a look at any of them, but that wouldn't be much fun. The way they do it here, letting you catch glimpses here and there, and letting your mind fill in all the horrible details and all the tentacle abominations, oh baby, that's horror horror at its finest. Reminds me a bit of Cloverfield in that regard. You know, The Mist might not be the scariest movie ever made, but it is an absolutely great one that is often forgot about sometimes when we discuss great horror movies. It's out there on Netflix, so you got no reason not to. In fact, I tried pretty hard to curate this list of mostly stuff that was streaming on Netflix so you could watch them after I was done talking about them. Don't say the casual Crypt Keeper doesn't do anything nice for you now. Number 5, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Who doesn't love taking a trip down to the 100-acre woods with Winnie the Pooh and all his funny friends? These beloved childhood characters are ready to shine on the silver screen. In a sequel to Pooh's Heffalump Adventure, please welcome Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, an ultra-violent splatterhouse slasher set in the 100-acre woods, reimagining the beloved children's characters as bloodthirsty maniacs who spend a whole lot less time playing around and eating honey and getting stuck in trees and more time chasing people with axes and rusty pickaxes and stuff. Oh bother. Trailers and photos of Blood and Honey went viral pretty much immediately because I think everyone saw it and kind of did the same thing where we were like, that's real? What? Yeah, it is. Copyright law and public domain is a wild thing. Winnie the Pooh is public domain, so you watching at home, if you want to make your own Winnie the Pooh movie, this is my invitation. You go right ahead. So here we are. We have an ultra-violent Winnie the Pooh movie. Something absolutely no one was asking for, but I'm glad we have anyway, because at the very least, I can't claim to have ever seen a movie like this, really. And you know what? Credit where it's due, it does actually look pretty unnerving. Pooh looks the most terrifying he ever has, a far cry from all of our nice memories of him. Piglet as well has gone from like a cute little cutie to like a hillbilly horror. Eeyore, my favorite, he's not around because if the plot summary on IMDb is anything to go by, Winnie the Pooh ate him. He's probably happier now, I guess. That's kind of what he always wanted. I think this will be a fun watch, kind of a movie to get a big pepperoni pizza and some snacks and a few friends around. I don't think it'll win an Oscar, but the novelty will do it for me. If it turns out to be a big success, director Rice Frake Waterfield has spoken out about how he wants to make an entire series of public domain slasher movies, eventually building up to a shared universe because everyone wants some of that sweet MCU money. Me personally, I would love to see the new Winnie the Pooh going toe-to-toe with Peter Rabbit in a horror movie Alien vs. Predator situation. I know they've had tension for years. Time will tell if this dream will come to light, but pre-production has already started on a Peter Pan movie in a similar vein to Blood and Honey, so expect a blood-soaked trip to Neverland sometime in the near future. But if you can't wait and you want more horror content right now, you don't need to grab a ticket to the movies. You can just stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary for more premium horror content literally every single day. We got scary stuff for every occasion, so click through and I'm certain you'll find something to like. But finish up this one first, okay? We got lots more movies to go. Number 4, Skinamarink. I love a low-down horror. Even better, like a low-down, low-budget found footage horror. Some of my favorite flicks are stuff like Blair Witch Project or VHS. It's a great way for lower-budget productions to stand out, where you can't just rely on tons and tons of gore effects or CGI monsters to serve up scares and have to, you know, use creative filmmaking. So let me introduce Skinamarink, a Canadian experimental horror film made on an absolute shoestring budget that has critics singing praises and double-checking their hallways just to make sure no evil got inside. Skinamarink is about as bare bones as a movie can get. It was made on a budget that was less than the price of most used cars and was shot entirely on digital in the childhood home of the director, which I guess would technically make this a home movie. Skinamarink is one of those ones where really the less you know about it, the better, so I don't want to give too much away, so I'll give you the little IMDb teaser and hopefully that's enough to excite you. The son and daughter of a family wake up in the middle of the night, discover that their father is missing, and discover that something is happening to the house as all windows, doors, and entrances and exits to the outside world appear to just be vanishing. The director, Kyle Edward Ball, is making his cinema debut with Skinamarink, and prior to this he made short films on a YouTube channel inspired by commenters' nightmares that they had when they were young. Skinamarink is no different, with some reviewers pointing out that it was the kind of movie that made them feel like they were young again, wanting to pull a blanket over their eyes, afraid of boogeymen in the dark or monsters under the bed. So if you're looking for tons of action, movie monsters, blood splatters, Skinamarink is not really that at all. But if you want a slower, very like down-to-earth, grounded, low-budget horror movie, Skinamarink will have you glued to the scene, glued to the screen. I literally can't read today. I'd say if you're a fan of stuff like the Blair Witch Project, you owe it to yourself to give Skinamarink a shot. Plus, let's shout out as many independent Canadian filmmakers as we can. Number 3, Hellraiser 2022. The original Hellraiser is one of my absolute favorite horror films ever, which I think tells you just about everything you need to know about me. I mean, I love the Cenobites and I love all the sights they have to show me. The original movie is scary, absolutely like gut-churningly disgusting, and it's a piece of special effect wizardry that still holds up to this day. It also gave us one of the best, creepiest horror movie icons with Pinhead. Originally dubbed the Priest, the tall, slender demon, or angel to some, who enjoys pleasure and heart-stopping pain in equal measures. So when they announced that they were going to reboot Hellraiser and also recast Pinhead, myself and a lot of fans were more than a little hesitant at a new take on the classic character, but then I found out it was being directed by David Bruckner, who made The Ritual and worked on VHS, and I knew the film was in good hands, and lo and behold, hey, it was pretty good. The visual effects and gore for the new film are some of the best out there. The new design for Pinhead is horrifyingly cool, trading out the old goth kid at a nightclub look for a terrifying like flayed skin design, making it look like she's wearing a costume when really she's just naked and had all her skin peeled, which is the most Hellraiser thing ever. And oh yeah, Pinhead's a girl now. Slip that in like it was nothing. For me, a Hellraiser film's most important quality above all else is it goopy and gross. Does it make me want to cover my eyes and not look at whatever's on the screen? Yeah? Then this is a great Hellraiser film, and I want to see more through cracks of my fingers, so give it a watch. I wish this one could have been in theaters. It's streaming on Hulu for those who get that, and available on digital purchase everywhere else. Go in, give it an open mind, if for nothing else than its gross out effects. I know that doesn't really sound like a pleasant selling point for a movie. If you're gonna see Hellraiser, that's exactly what you want. Number 2, Knock at the Cabin. Now, depending on how you feel, M. Night Shyamalan is either a total hack who's been coasting for years on a dwindling reputation, or is a misunderstood auteur who's one of the last unique voices in horror cinema, and it really doesn't seem like there's much wiggle room for where people fall on that guy. So let me know down below in the comments what you think about old M. Night. Genius or total goof? Knock at the Cabin is the newest Shyamalan flick starring Dave Bautista and Jonathan Groff. It's an apocalyptic psychological horror thriller, which is a great combination of words in my opinion. Bautista and Groff play parents of a young girl who are vacationing out in a cabin. But things take a dour turn when the family is apprehended by armed bandits, who insist that they've seen prophetic visions of the end of days. And the only way to prevent the apocalypse from claiming the globes will be to sacrifice a member of their own family. That's all the recipe for a good thriller for me. Now, Knock at the Cabin just came out, and I haven't even had time to see it yet. I only get so much time away from the fog. I watch 4 movies a year, to be honest, and they're the same movies I've been watching since I was a kid. So we'll see if it stands the test of time and if it'll be a classic or a flop, but I've heard lots of great things from a lot of my friends who like these kind of movies. So, you know what? We'll catch up to this one and I'll loop back around. I'll let you know how I feel. Keep an eye out for another video like this where I'll bring up Knock at the Cabin again. And number 1, The Exorcist. Hey, wait a second. The Exorcist already came out. That was like a long time ago. It came out in like 1973. I know they made some sequels and stuff, and you can always crank some more out, but we're getting a brand new Exorcist movie in 2023? Oh, and it's serving as a sequel to the original 1973 film, and disregarding all other sequels in favor of a new timeline. That kind of sounds like what they did with Halloween, you know, in 2018 when that guy David Gordon Green made a Halloween sequel that was a sequel to the original film only, and erased all the other so-so sequels and brought back the old characters and everything, and it was pretty good. And oh, David Gordon Green is directing this Exorcist movie too. So this guy's just got one trick then. He makes sequels to classic horror movies. We don't know a whole lot about the new Exorcist movie. In fact, if you go to IMDb right now, it's officially listed as Untitled The Exorcist Film, which I don't think is the catchiest name. That's probably gonna look a little bit busy on the movie poster. So far, the only confirmed details that we know for certain is that David Gordon Green is directing, and Ellen Burstyn will be reprising her role as the mother from the original Exorcist film. Just like how Jamie Lee suited up to beat Michael Myers around the block in Halloween 2018. Now, will this new Exorcist movie be good? Personally, I'm pretty optimistic. The 2018 Halloween is fantastic, and is my opinion the second best Halloween movie ever made, after the first one, which carries a lot for me. The other 2 in the trilogy didn't do much for me, but that's neither here nor there. We've had a lot of good possession movies coming out. The Conjuring franchise is mostly about that, so I think it would be pretty cool to see a new one from a guy who we all know can deliver a good legacy horror sequel sequel and can bring up some scares and respect an old franchise. Number 5, Renfield. I feel like this is the rare movie where I honestly don't need to see a single trailer or even hear a single fact or tidbit of trivia to know I want to see it, other than one piece of information. Nicolas Cage plays Dracula in this movie. Okay, moving on. We're gonna go on to number 4. No, okay, I'll actually fill it out a bit. We'll talk about Renfield just a little bit. As if you need anything more than Nicolas Cage plays Dracula. Renfield is an upcoming horror comedy featuring the immortal Count Dracula, and I think he's played by, I don't know, some like B-movie actor or something, and his humble manservant Renfield, who's been indebted to Dracula for centuries and is growing more than a bit weary of it. The two of them find themselves in modern Louisiana, a far cry away from the Romanian castles the Count is used to, and trouble arises when his servant finds himself falling in love with a police officer and comedy ensues. Interestingly, this script was inspired by a pitch from Robert Kirkman. You probably know him as the creator of The Walking Dead and Invincible, and was adapted into a screenplay. Kirkman isn't particularly known for his comedy, he's definitely known for his violence and gore, so it's a bit of a step outside his comfort zone. Alongside Nicolas Cage in the starring role is an all-star cast of actors. Nicholas Hoult from Mad Max, X-Men, The Menu is playing the eponymous Renfield. Awkwafina is the police officer he finds himself smitten with, and we got Parks and Rec alum and Sonic the Hedgehog voice actor Ben Schwartz as a mob. Nicolas Cage in comedies is some of his best. The unbearable weight of massive talent was a real surprise hit for me. Definitely go see that. Nick Cage plays himself, it's fantastic. And if you've somehow done yourself the utter disservice of never having seen Vampires Kiss, I implore you, please go get that done. Since Nick Cage plays a vampire in that, and it's absolutely hilarious. It's one of the most insane performances he's ever given. Renfield is set to drop in April, and you can absolutely believe I will be there front row day one. And if you're looking for more scary movie content, true tales of terror, fake fibs of frights, ghouls, goblins, aliens, cryptids, and everything freaky under the sun and above it, well, have I got something for you. Is this playlist on Top 5 Scary? Click through, stay scared, but most importantly, stay subscribed, because we're trying to get those numbers up. Now let's keep going. Number 4, Scream 6. It's always someone you know. Although Sidney Prescott managed to finally shake Woodsboro's most infamous resident, it seems that the ghost face can't be put down just that easily. Scream 6 is a big departure for the franchise, taking place in New York instead of a small Californian town, and may I just say, it's high time. You know, slashers have been acting like they're too good to make movie sequels about their bad guys going to space or going to New York anymore. Jason did it, and I guess we just decided it just wasn't vogue anymore, but hogwash, I love seeing Ghostface running around the Big Apple. Ghostface on the subway. He's not supposed to be there. What are you doing there, man? The torch of Final Girl has been passed from Sidney Prescott to Tara Carpenter, introduced in the previous film and played by everybody's favorite goth girl, Jenna Ortega. Some other reprising roles include Hayden Panettiere coming back to play Kirby, a fan favorite character from Scream 4 whose death kind of left a bad taste in all of our mouths. So seeing her come back is actually super cool. There was a little Easter egg that confirmed she was alive in Scream 5, so I'm very excited to see her come back. I am a huge Scream fan if that is not coming across. We're also going to see Scream 5's protagonist Sam Carpenter return, and series mainstay Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers. No word on how horrifying her haircut's going to be. It would be a strange Scream film if it didn't have at least one cast member. Losing Neve Campbell and David Arquette definitely hurts, so one legacy member is more than enough. It's being directed by a duo of Tyler Gillett and Matt Bettinelli-Olpin, who worked together to make the last Scream movie, which honestly I thought was pretty good. I know some people had some issues with it, but I really liked it. They also made Ready or Not and had previously collaborated on the horror anthology series VHS. I'm personally super excited for Scream. Of all the slasher franchises out there, and I might land myself in some hot water with this hot take, but I think Scream is the most consistent. I think all of the Scream movies are pretty good. Even the worst Scream movie, Scream 3, is still like leagues better than most of the Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. I just love Ghostface. I love that little goof. Although the loss of Wes Craven is definitely felt deeply, the previous film left me as a fan feeling like the series was being taken care of. The meta commentary was top notch, the scares were blood curdling, and there was a good amount of that Scream humor. I cannot wait to find out who's under that mask come March. Number 3, Evil Dead Rise. Groovy. Evil Dead has always been one of my absolute favorite horror movies ever. I love a horror comedy. If you couldn't tell already from my passion for Scream and my excitement for Renfield, and no one has ever done it better than Evil Dead 2, which might genuinely be one of my favorite movies of all time, let alone horror movies. I've probably seen that like 30 or so times. For all the quips, chainsaw arms, time travel, boomsticks, and gallons of fake blood, it's easy to forget that originally Evil Dead started as a low-budget horror movie trying to shock you to sickness with its gore and scares, and was trying to take itself a little bit seriously. The franchise tried to reboot itself about a decade ago, simply titled Evil Dead, hoping to recapture that same feeling of terror and a bunch of teens lost in a cabin. In a departure for the movies, Ash Williams and his chainsaw was nowhere to be found, and the comedy was completely absent unless you consider someone sawing their arm off with a bread cutter hilarious. And if you do, I don't really want to watch any like comedies with you. Well, Rise is set to try one more time at capturing that original gore fest. It seems like it's disconnected from the 80s films and the 2013 reboot and is doing its own thing. Evil Dead Rise sees a pair of estranged sisters reuniting in a cramped Los Angeles apartment, and their reunion is cut short after discovering a flesh-bound book, one Necronomicon Ex Mortis, in the sisters' building, which, well, if you know anything about Evil Dead, you know reading that book is very bad news and pretty much a guarantee that you're going to invite an army of flesh-eating demons into your world. If the trailer is anything to go by, expect Evil Dead Rise to be packed to bursting with gross-out gore, high-octane scares, and not a whole lot of one-liners. Bruce Campbell has an EP credit on this, but he's leaving the boomstick behind for this one. 3 seasons of Ash vs. the Evil Dead was more than enough for him and more than enough for me, so I'm just excited to see some new Evil Dead content regardless. The trailer was super promising and already had me scared, and if they can do that on a video I'm watching on my phone, I cannot even imagine how much popcorn I'm going to be flinging around the theater when I see this in April. Number 2, Saw X. Saw 10. Saw X? Saw 10. Well, we'll decide. I don't know what they want to call it. The games never end. So long as the sun still sets, they will continue making Saw movies. Death, taxes, they're gonna keep making Saw movies. Those are certainties of the world. There's always more inventive ways to show horrific dismemberments and really stretch the definition of what a game is. The franchise has been spinning its wheels for a little bit, with most fans agreeing that there hasn't been a truly great Saw movie in years. Saw 7, The Final Chapter, Jigsaw, and Spiral were all pretty weak entries that disappointed longtime fans. Saw The Final Chapter, ain't that ironic? We were all hoping to see a little bit more of John Kramer, less convoluted plot twists and retcons, and more of what Saw's all about, chaining people to radiators who probably didn't deserve that much torment. While Spiral seemed like a step in the right direction, it did underperform dramatically and wasn't exactly the reboot worthy of saving the series. So longtime Saw collaborators Kevin Greutert and Josh Stolberg came together to pen and direct a script for Saw X. Saw 10. At this time, very little is known about the 10th entry in the splattering series, other than that Tobin Bell, best known for his role as John Kramer and that funny little puppet, will be returning with a main character role. So we can expect lots of Kramer goodness, lots of pre-recorded messages about how much blood victims are going to have to shed to learn important life lessons. Exciting too is Shawnee Smith, who plays Amanda Young, Jigsaw's troubled apprentice from the first 3 Saw movies, is set to return as well. And reports say that it's going to take place at some point during the first and second film, which makes sense since, spoiler alert from a movie from 2004, Jigsaw dies in the 3rd one, so, wasn't a lot to do there. He's capable of a lot of things, but bringing himself back from the dead he hasn't quite nailed yet. Do I think Saw 10 is going to be the best movie ever? Probably not, who's to say, but I absolutely love the Saw series, bones and all, pun intended, for all its ridiculous soap opera level twists, secret apprentices, and just utterly insane death trap, and of course, that little puppet. So I'm excited to spend any time at all in that dirty bathroom one more time. Number 1, Five Nights at Freddy's. Yeah, no, I'm being serious. I'm including this on the list because you know what? I'm genuinely looking forward to it. If you're unfamiliar with the IP somehow, Five Nights at Freddy's is a series of video games about a haunted pizzeria populated by an animatronic cartoon band who's a lot more lively than their stilted animations will suggest. They come to life at night and have a real hunger for just about anything that isn't animatronic. Now the series gets unbelievably complicated, so I'll let someone else more knowledgeable than me explain that. If you're a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, head on over to Top 10 Gaming. They do so much Five Nights stuff, you'll have stuff to watch for years. The mega popular smash hit indie game franchise blew up pretty much overnight. Going from one developer's passion project, a short half-hour scary point-and-click game, became a media empire, spanning 9 games, not including spin-offs, a series of novels and comic books, and a movie that's been in production hell since 2015. The Five Nights movie has passed from multiple creators and teams, and for ages, it seemed like it was never going to actually materialize and just existed as a sort of vague tease. But as of 2020, 2023 though, we have found a team, we've found a script, and we've got some concrete evidence it exists. It's being actively filmed, and it's starring Josh Hutcherson as the doomed security guard, and horror icon Matthew Lillard, famous for playing Shaggy in Scooby-Doo, and the original Ghostface, spoilers, will be playing the villainous owner of the Fazbear franchise. Early reports too said the animatronics in the film will be all practical effects, which if done right will be premium unleaded nightmare fuel. I am a sucker for a practical effect in a horror movie. All bets are on for the Five Nights movie to be a pretty big hit. Jason Blum, the head of Blumhouse, is producing, and Matt Lillard has already agreed to do a trilogy of Five Nights at Freddy's movies. So watch this space when we do top 5 horror movies for 2024, and I mentioned Five Nights at Freddy's 2 in the #1 spot. Number 5, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A good tagline can really sell your movie, you know? In space, no one can hear you scream. You'll believe a man can fly. Absolute classics. In my opinion, there's few that go harder than the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre's bold proclamation and threat: who will survive and what will be left of them. The original Texas Chainsaw is a legend of horror, practically kickstarting slasher movies altogether. While there's a whole other discussion to be had about what could be considered the first true slasher movie, there's no denying that Chainsaw wrote the rulebook. Hulking monsters in a mask, a screaming final girl. Texas Chainsaw was writing the rules years before Michael Myers was chasing Jamie Lee. Texas Chainsaw is the classic slasher premise. A group of hapless young fools all fall victim to the kind of horrors that only exist in our worst nightmares. The Sawyer clan are a family of deranged hillbillies living in rural Texas who believe in using every part of the meat they hunt for their chili. They're not really interested in beef though. It's almost got a bit of a misleading name. You hear Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you imagine a sea of corn syrup, blood, and special effects that'll leave you needing a barf bag. And hey, don't worry. The stream of sequels and remakes that followed definitely do get there. The 2006 one is maybe one of the grossest movies I've ever seen. But the original is a much better made movie than any of that. It's honestly not nearly as gory as the title would have you believe, and would probably be considered tame by modern standards. I'd go so far as to say it's a masterpiece. Few movies capture the feeling of true insanity the way this one does. The screaming, the hooting, the hollering, being hunted by the Sawyers is the kind of fear that feels like it belongs in an evidence locker, not in a theater. It says something that in a study using Texas Chainsaw as a litmus test for audience perceptions of horror movies, the survey came back saying that the scariest thing in the entire movie was not the monsters or the chainsaws, but just the screams of the victims. Hey, enjoying what we do? We'd love if you toss and subscribe our way for more scary content every single day. Number 4, Sinister. Now, I normally don't like to bring science into a discussion about horror movies or about ghosts, but a recent 2020 study involving attaching heart monitors to viewers and making them watch horror movies while researchers tracked their heart rates apparently revealed Sinister to be the scariest movie of all time. Medically speaking, proof is in the pudding, or the heart rate. To be completely honest, I definitely see where they're coming from. I didn't need any sort of medical equipment to tell you I found Sinister downright terrifying. Sinister at first seems like it's going to be a pretty run-of-the-mill, corny ghost house movie, but after about 15 minutes my worries were put to bed and instead replaced by nightmares. A struggling true crime writer, played by a personal favorite, Mr. Ethan Hawke, moves into a house knowingly that was host to a series of grisly, horrifying rituals to some dark god. Hey, in this economy, you gotta take whatever deals you can. He moves in hoping that getting close to the scene of the crime will inspire his writings, and it sort of does, in a way, because he finds a series of films in the attic all showcasing the brutal things that have happened in his new home. And it does not take long before our would-be writer is obsessing over his home movie collection, letting it affect his work, his family, and his brain. Another great one where you're never sure how supernatural things are until you're extremely sure. Ethan Hawke rides the line well between kind of being dumb enough that you sort of think he deserves what's coming to him, but also sympathetic enough that you don't want to see him get grabbed anytime soon. A fantastic score sets the tone, leaving you always just a little anxious and your heart never quite slowing down enough to breathe. The scenes of the home movies in question are actually some of the scariest things I think I've ever seen in a Hollywood flick, and definitely deserve special mention, as they're probably the highlight of the film. Disturbingly real enough to seem like they might actually have happened, and restrained enough as well that it never dwells on the violence too much, letting your imagination fill in all the horrible, horrible blanks. Number 3, Saw. Now, Saw is hardly underrated or some hidden gem. They made 9 of them. I think everyone knows about Jigsaw and his sick little games by now, but that doesn't stop the original 2004 film from being one of my go-to Halloween movies every year. Equal parts detective thriller and equal parts stomach-churningly terrifying, there's a simple elegance to the first Saw. Before the storyline became so convoluted you needed a historian to help you navigate the timeline and secret double crosses, backstabs, betrayals, and secret jigsaws, there was just 2 men, a freaky little puppet, 1 rancid bathroom, and a saw. The movies get ridiculous very, very fast, with Jigsaw's level of control varying from superhuman levels of planning to straight up bad man, bad guy in some of the sequels. And the first is like that too, but there's something so terrifyingly real about the first one, you know? It feels like the worst intrusive thought you could ever have. Imagine someone had been stalking you, making a list of your wrongdoings, and wanted to test if you truly appreciated your life, if you'd be willing to fight for it. As a kid, even though I knew he was a fictional character played by a guy who's actually pretty nice in real life, I was terrified that one day I would wake up chained to a radiator, hear that hiss and crackle of the TV static, and see that evil little puppet grinning up at me. The first movie cuts all the fat, pun intended, and gets in good as you watch Jigsaw's two victims descend to madness at a breakneck pace when they realizes the consequences are more dire than they could have ever assumed, and there isn't a way for either of these men to leave in one piece. It's gross, it's lowbrow, it is absolutely edge of your seat horrifying. I think the first one has one of the most off-putting atmospheres I've ever seen in a horror movie. Every inch of that set just looks like it was abhorrently rancid. It looks like it's not even safe to be breathing in there. It just feels jagged and sticky, you know? Like you gotta take a shower after watching. Number 2, Hereditary. Now, it would not be a scariest horror movie list without Hereditary. Hereditary, to date, is the only movie I thought, hey, I might have to walk out of this because I genuinely don't think I can take what's happening. Now, the more likely scenario is that I'm a massive wimp, but the other very likely possibility is that this movie is just gut-wrenchingly terrifying. Hereditary tells us the story of a doomed family seeking to uncover and hopefully break the generational curse placed on them as a gift from their passing matriarch, who seems to have been up to some shadier business than anyone could have known. After a heinously tragic accident, the family finds themselves descending into a web of madness, distrust, and fear. Hereditary is probably one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, and there's barely so much as a jump scare. There's very little in the ways of ghouls, goblins, or ghosts in this one, just itchy fear. That fear of being unable to protect your family, watching it all fall apart, and the age-old fear of wondering if perhaps you've got some sort of ancient, unavoidable satanic curse placed on you and your family. You know, regular stuff. The movie builds agonizingly slowly, leaving you waiting and wondering the entire time if there really is anything supernatural happening or if you're just driving yourself mad wondering while you watch. If you like a slower burn kind of horror movie, then Hereditary is perfect for you. It's full of the kind of nightmarish imagery that isn't leaving you anytime soon, and that's where it scares best, showing you something for just a second or two that you would never want to see in your life, ever, not dwelling on it too long, but just enough to stick in your head like a bad dream, and then appear in your bad dreams every night thereafter. Number 1, Halloween. Okay guys, I'm gonna come clean, I'm gonna be honest. This whole channel is all just a big ruse for me to talk about the Halloween movies. All the other videos are nothing more than a facade for my real goal, to talk about Michael Myers and his sometime sister Laurie Strode. The Megalodon? Ghosts? Aliens? All my lesser muses. Compared to some other entries on this list, or even its many sequels, the original Halloween is downright tame in terms of blood and gore. In fact, there's actually barely any blood and no gore. A stark contrast to Rob Zombie and David Gordon Green's approach to the boogeyman. The original really focuses on the cat and mouse game between the Shape and his obsession, Laurie Strode. Most horror movie protagonists, usually the protagonists, have condemned themselves to some karmic fate. Like I mentioned, the guy from Sinister chose to watch all those scary tapes. The counselors who venture to Camp Crystal Lake every year, despite the warnings, it makes us, the audience, not really feel bad for what's about to happen to them because we know they sealed their doom. But Laurie Strode is a completely innocent bystander to all of it, who just has the unfortunate stroke of bad luck of just happening to be the wrong person standing in the wrong place when Michael sets his eyes on her, spurring a 4-decade-long obsession. That terrifying implication that it could happen to anyone, that the boogeyman could be behind you at any time, making you his next victim solely because you were in the way. Some horror movies from the 70s and 80s start to show their age, but masterful film work like Halloween doesn't. The way the camera lingers on Michael with that haunting synth soundtrack still riles me up to this day. That tension in the air when Michael starts to go after Laurie's friends, first disguising himself in that ghost sheet. Hey. Other movies always walk the line with what Michael is, with some of them offering detailed backstories. Sometimes he's born out of a dark cult, sometimes he had a troubled childhood and no one but Rob Zombie understood him. But in the original, we get the most concise, simple, and effective explanation. He's evil. He's just pure evil behind those black eyes, and that is the scariest answer imaginable. Number 5, you're next. Hey, family dinners are always a bit awkward, aren't they? You know, trying to get the gravy passed to you, trying to avoid an argument with your uncle about your career, and trying to elude the vicious sickos that are hunting you and your family for sport. Your Next is a 2011 slasher directed by Adam Wingard, who also blessed us with Godzilla vs. Kong, one of the finest films ever made. Made on a humble $1 million budget, Your Next is a horror movie that brings it to the absolute basics. One house, one troubled family, and 3 very dangerous psychopaths. An estranged family is meeting for a reunion at their summer home in the rural Deep South, and newcomer to the family, Erin, is nervous to be introduced officially as her boyfriend's long-term partner. Now, tensions are high enough with the usual family drama before the first crossbow bolt pierces the window, as the family is being hunted by a relentless pack of bloodthirsty animal mask-wearing lunatics who seem to be doing this whole thing just for kicks. Watch the family fall apart under pressure, metaphorically and uncomfortably literally, as they're picked off one by one by their sick predators, until one of them starts to rise up unexpectedly against their tormentors. Now, if you were a fan of the Hotline Miami games, this is probably as close as you're ever gonna get to a movie for that 80s splatter feel and all the animal mask wearing lunatics. Your Next feels like a movie that got time traveled from 1984 in the best way. It's a throwback to the golden age of B-horror movies. Wet, gross, stupid, and in the darkest ways, really funny. This movie's almost a dysfunctional family comedy, if you can call it that. It's sinister, sick, gruesome, and hilarious, has an absolutely great sense of style, really cool soundtrack, and I guarantee you the main song from the movie is gonna get stuck in your head for weeks afterwards. Definitely check Your Next out if you're looking for some fluffy horror fun. I've got a DVD at home if you want to borrow it. Now, hey ghouls and goblins, you already know that the best place for the scary video— Hey ghouls and goblins, you already know the best place for scary videos on the web is right here, but if somehow you didn't know that, always a good time to learn, so why don't you subscribe so you never miss a scare. Number 4. The Color Out of Space. When we think H.P. Lovecraft, we tend to think of giant squid monsters and incomprehensible madness. Well, this movie's got one of those in folds, and it's not the squid monster. The Color Out of Space is a 2019 horror movie directed by Richard Stanley, adapting the H.P. Lovecraft story of the exact same name, but modernizing it slightly, bringing it up to the 21st century. The story details a father moving his family to his late father's farm, escaping the bright lights and humdrum of city life, moving to his hometown of Arkham, the exceedingly cursed city from Lovecraft's writings. What should be a breath of fresh air and lovely times in the cottage turns to a nightmare when an asteroid falls to the farm, releasing with it a mysterious color that seeps into the farmland. A color out of space, if you will. It affects the minds of everyone around the farm, all the animals, and begins to seep into the water and drive everyone to incomprehensible madness. Nick Cage plays the patriarch of the Gardner family, and let me tell you, there could not possibly have been a better actor for the lead in a movie about slowly going mad. I mean, Nick Cage on his absolute best day already seems like he's about 2 screws short of absolute madness, so watching him in this is a treat. You spend the entire time wondering if the insanity is taking him over and consuming his brain, or if that's just how Nicolas Cage talks and he thinks he's doing a New England accent right now. Color Out of Space builds really slowly, leaving you on edge the entire time, and when the madness sets in, it sets in hard as you painfully watch the farmstead fall, desperate that maybe, just maybe, someone will pull through against the immeasurable horror of some entity beyond the cosmos. It captures Lovecraft's writing effortlessly and brings it to the modern age flawlessly, with all the blood and insanity you could hope for. Number 3. The Void. Our next entry on this list is The Void, a 2016 horror flick by Steven Kostanski, another Lovecraft horror movie. Your host has a little bit of a bias, and this one's Canadian made, so I have to include it based on that alone. It also totally rocks, so there is that. The Void is another flick that feels like it time traveled through the mid-80s, and maybe that's just my personal taste, but that is very much a good thing. The Void seems like the kind of thing John Carpenter would have slapped his name on. A small-town deputy has his night wildly disturbed when he finds someone suffering from violent injuries, and after taking him to the local hospital, finds himself trapped in the hospital with his ex-wife, a nurse, who's dealing with a crisis of her own, as the hospital is being overrun by an onslaught of mysterious injuries and madness. The two estranged lovers find themselves caught in a blood-soaked conflict between a sinister cult and some entity that appears able to revive the dead, albeit a bit twisted into horrifying monstrosities of flesh and bone. Now, if you're like me and you think The Thing is the greatest horror movie ever made, The Void feels like it could be its unofficial sequel. It's better than the actual sequel prequel to The Thing that they made. The special effects on the monsters are fantastic. If you're the kind of ghoul who loves puppets, prosthetics, and gallons worth of corn syrup blood, The Void has everything you are looking for in those 3 spades. And the plot is fun, and it has some good twists and turns, but let's be honest here. You're watching this one because it's got very gross monsters and really cool Lovecraft-inspired mythos of cults and a great god beyond the stars. You want my advice? grab a friend or two, order the largest, greasiest pizza your local favorite spot has, grab a 2-liter of something carbonated, and have a great Friday night with this one. The Void to me is what a good horror movie should be. Gross, scary, a little stupid, and a ton of fun. Number 2, Hush. Okay, enough movies about incomprehensible horrors from beyond the stars. Let's reel it in a bit, and let's get back to some comprehensible horror. Home invasion. Lock those doors. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn the volume up. Hush is a 2016 slasher home invasion movie coming to us from Blumhouse horror icon Mike Flanagan, director of a ton of amazing horror projects like Oculus, Dr. Sleep, Midnight Mass, The Haunting of shows, and Hush is no exception to that rule. A deaf and mute horror writer, that's why I did that before, who lives alone with her cat in the woods with a few isolated neighbors around her, becomes the unwilling target in the most dangerous game when a twisted hunter decides to make her his prey. After hunting her neighbor with a crossbow, he sets his sight on her next. When he learns that his next victim is deaf and mute, it seems like he finds himself thrilled at the possibility of a challenge. Now, Hush could have very easily just been your run-of-the-mill slasher home invasion movie, but it stands a lot taller than that with some incredibly fantastic sound design. I mean, I would hope so, given the premise of the movie and the name of the movie. The movie is so tense and saves its sounds really effectively for when it knows it's going to be the scariest. Makes it a lot scarier than the usual horror movies with a bombastic booming soundtrack and tons of scare hordes. It lets you really breathe in the tension. The cat and mouse game between the protagonist Maddie and the unnamed hunter feels deeply personal, putting you smack dab in the middle of it, chewing your fingernails the entire time as you hope for the best. Please check out Hush. Now, number 1, Green Room. Coming in at our number 1 spot is one of my favorite horror thrillers of all time, Green Room. An A24 horror classic before that was even a cool thing to describe your movie as. A failing Midwestern punk band are trying to hit it big while traveling the Northwest, barely scraping by on instant ramen and van life when they agree to play a gig at a rural roadhouse. Absolutely thrilled at the prospect of getting paid for once, the band takes the gig without asking any questions, only to swiftly discover upon arriving that they are in bad company. The bar is ran and owned by a skinhead gang who don't take kindly to them whatsoever. After the bassist witnesses a crime in the eponymous Green Room, the band is trapped by the gang who refuses to let them leave. Alive. From here, the movie turns into a sort of reverse home invasion as the band tries desperately to escape the clutches of the gang by any means necessary. Green Room is tense. You are going to feel like you are trapped in there with them. If you've ever survived a local DIY show basement, then the sights of Green Room will look pretty familiar to you. Setting a high-octane horror movie in such a hostile environment that you'll recognize makes it feel all the more real. You know, I've seen countless horror movies in haunted houses, but I can't name that many in a bar basement. Green Room is horror at some of its best, taking a concept I guarantee you haven't seen before and exploring it beyond just a simple bloody slasher. Fantastic camera work, dark humor, and a gripping plot with lovable characters and truly hateable villains. We are 3 paragraphs into me talking about this, and I haven't even dropped the biggest bomb, which is that the leader of the skinhead gang is played by Sir Patrick Stewart in one of his most unhinged roles ever since maybe American Dad. I'd say he steals this thing, but honestly everybody delivers. Anton Yelchin also delivers one of the best performances of his career as the band's weary, tortured bassist. Go into Green Room expecting a super tense, shockingly gory, but amazing horror movie if you can brave it. Just make sure you get a stamp on your wrist so you can leave. Number 5, The Lighthouse. From visionary director Robert Eggers comes The Lighthouse, a harrowing fable that teaches us the importance of respecting personal boundaries and respecting seabirds. Eggers is one of my favorite modern horror directors, whose work sits a cut above the most usual horror fare with The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman, which isn't quite horror unless you're terrified of Norway. The Lighthouse is unlike any other scary movies you've seen. Actually, it's probably unlike most movies you've seen. It's kind of hard to define The Lighthouse under one genre. It's unsettling and definitely makes me feel all heebly-jeebly watching it, but it isn't horror in the traditional sense. There's no monsters or slashers, just 2 men, a lighthouse, a whole lot of seagulls, and enough cabin fever-induced madness to shake a lobster at. A rookie lighthouse keeper, played by Robert Pattinson, is assigned to keep a lighthouse on a small isolated island off the coast of New England, under the supervision of the island's crusty old master, Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson are some of the best working actors out there right now, and the 2 of these titans absolutely show up for this, carrying this 2-headed character piece on their backs and speaking in some of the most hilariously memorable accents ever put to film. Seriously, Willem Dafoe's old nautical piratical accent in this thing needs to be taught in acting schools. I would do an impression, but I won't do it justice. The film is shot beautifully, the whole thing seeming like a mix between a bad dream and an avant-garde theater production, leaving you asking the entire time if anything you're seeing can be trusted, if any of it's even happening, or if the whole thing is all just one twisted nightmare between two very lonely, isolated men. Now, I can't say for sure if they went nuts because they weren't subscribed to Top 5 Scary, but I'm willing to bet that a little bit of entertainment from the best scary videos channel on the web might have helped some of that madness. So subscribe, maybe. Number 4, Annihilation. I've talked a bit about Annihilation before on this channel, and I will continue to do so until Annihilation gets the respect it deserves. That's my mission. I've never forgiven the movie-going populace for not seeing this one in theaters. Annihilation came to us from director and writer Alex Garland, who also gave us Ex Machina, a fantastic movie about having a crush on a robot. Annihilation is a cosmic horror story detailing the effects of after an asteroid crashes to Earth and a mysterious alien presence known as the Shimmer begins to manifest across a quarantine zone in a forest outside an army base. Everything the Shimmer touches starts to blend together, biological life merging, double helixes swirling in a big cosmic gumbo. The film is hauntingly beautiful as it is terrifying. Our protagonist Lena, played by Natalie Portman, is a US Army veteran who lost her husband in an unrelated combat mission. One day he shows up on her doorstep, convulsing violently, leading Lena towards the Shimmer. Learning her husband was involved, she ventures forward with a group of fellow researchers and soldiers to uncover what lies at the heart of the Shimmer, what's causing it, and if it can be stopped. The film is a visual treat with its lush vistas and uniquely terrifying monster designs. I've talked about Annihilation Bear before, and I will take any opportunity to talk about Annihilation Bear. I love Annihilation Bear. Slap a photo of him back there for me. Annihilation is the perfect kind of horror movie, simultaneously exploring complex themes of depression, grief, humanity's inherent nature and propensity towards self-destructive behavior, but it also asks even bigger questions like, wouldn't it be really yucky if a bear had a human skull inside its head that screamed like a dying human while it was roaring? Get you a horror movie that can do both, okay? Number 3, Jacob's Ladder. While the first 2 entries on our list were pretty recent and well received, I want to throw it back a couple decades for our next entry and highlight a cult classic that could always use a little bit more love. Jacob's Ladder details the story of Jacob Singer, a Vietnam veteran who 4 years later, after returning home from the war, struggles to readjust to his normal life. Not helping matters much, no doubt, is the fact that Jacob keeps seeing horrifying monstrosities surrounding him every day. It seems as if since he's come home, nothing has ever been the same. The film shows us life through Jacob's tormented eyes. As he tries to navigate through healing and overcoming his personal demons, he is constantly haunted by real-life demons that seem to have a very vested interest in him. Matters only serve to get a lot more confusing when Jacob learns that other members of his platoon, back from his army days, have all been suffering similar things, reporting seeing the same monsters and being haunted. Desperate to find the truth, Jacob seeks out the cause of what's happening to him and his old friends, and ends up descending down a path of madness, learning things no man ever should. Worth noting is just how influential Jacob's Ladder is, serving as one of the direct inspirations for the legendary Silent Hill series of games, with Silent Hill 2 in particular taking major inspiration from the film's plotline, monsters, twists, right down to the protagonists even wearing the exact same outfit as a little homage. Jacob's Ladder is a little older than some of the other entries on this list. It is absolutely worth a watch and still worth your time. A great performance out of Tim Robbins and one of the most wild twist-ending horror movies ever had. A bunch have tried to copy this. I'm sure you've seen a million hack writers copy it, but no one did it as cool as when Jacob's Ladder did it, so there. And actually thinking about it, I shouldn't even mention a twist, so there was no twist. Everything in Jacob's Ladder happens very literally. Go into it knowing that, okay? Number 2, Sinister. Moving. It's always stressful, isn't it? It's a huge pain. Well, Sinister is a 2012 horror film about an everyday family moving houses and all the trials and tribulations that come with that, like having to update your postal code on your information, unpacking your stuff and figuring out where all your art books are gonna go, and finding out that you moved into a house where a series of grisly rituals happened, sacrificing the previous family who lived here, and it's all been filmed and kept in a box upstairs in the attic. You know, just regular stuff the kids go through all the time. A struggling true crime novelist is trying to chase his glory days and intentionally moves into a house he knows where ghastly deaths took place in order to get close to the story so he can better research it and write a bestseller. He discovers a box in the attic full of film of all of the crimes and becomes obsessed with uncovering and exposing what happened, mostly so he can make a quick buck and get himself back on top again and make the late night circuit. As As his obsession grows, it starts to affect his family and children in concerning ways, as everyone in the family starts acting stranger, having visions, hallucinations, and psychotic episodes, leaving you wondering if there is something much deeper going on in this house beyond a floundering author chasing a bestseller. Now, if you haven't seen this one, it's definitely worth going into this one as blind as you possibly can, because the twists and turns totally make this one. I spent the entire runtime of this propped up on the edge of the couch, my heart pounding, hoping that everything would turn out to be totally okay, even though I knew better. It's a horror movie, things never go great. The movie's got a stellar sense of dread that refuses to let go once it starts, and only lets you breathe out once the credits roll, and even then, not for very long. Fantastic performances across the board, but a special shout out goes to Ethan Hawke, who makes this thing. Number 1, Hereditary. Now, there are a ton of movies that could easily have taken the number 1 spot here, and I thought pretty hard about making The Shining number 1, since, you know, it's kind of a classic, but I figured a lot of people have talked about The Shining, and then I remembered the experience of seeing Hereditary in a movie theater, and how it was the only time in my life I've ever seriously thought about leaving a movie theater because I thought I was gonna throw up on the seats. I was so scared and uncomfortable. Hereditary is a 2018 horror movie from visionary Ari Aster, who also gave us the psychological horror movie masterpiece Midsommar, so Aster really just bangs out the hits. Hereditary is about as peak A24 horror movie as it gets. One of those ones where the monster is really a metaphor for generational trauma and all that. After the grand matriarch of a Midwestern family passes away, her daughter and grandkids begin to uncover the cryptic and terrifying truth behind their ancestry, trying desperately to escape the sinister legacy they've inadvertently inherited. This movie is terrifying in the worst of ways. It's not just jump scares or tons of blood. No. This is elevated horror. This is not your usual horror story. It really zeroes in on the way too close to home horror of watching a family break apart. It is gut-wrenchingly painful to watch, preying on really specific kind of fears. It's gonna get its hooks in you and have your teeth grinding for the full 2 hours runtime and for ages afterwards. If you've seen this, I dare you to look at a pigeon, a stop sign, cheese wire, or a treehouse ever the same after this movie. And staggering performances. Toni Collette goes for absolute gold and delivers one of the best performances I've ever seen in a horror movie, full stop. She needs an Oscar for most upsetting crying I have ever heard in a film, which is a category she would have no competition in. Hereditary might not be the goriest film or even the scariest movie I've ever seen or most upsetting. There's a bunch of Takashi Miike or Park Chan-wook films that would probably take that. But Hereditary is definitely one of the most viscerally scary movies I've ever seen. The kind that just sits in your gut and makes you think about it all day, like you were living through an actual nightmare. Watch only if you're truly brave. I know I made it sound absolutely horrible, but it is a great movie. Just don't be surprised if you don't sleep that night.
Number 5, Halloween Ends. But will it though? Because there's like 46 full-length movies in this universe, isn't there? Hey, and we love them all. Who am I kidding? Halloween Ends is an upcoming American slasher film directed and written by David Gordon Green, Danny McBride, Paul Brad Logan, and Chris Bernier. The current R-rated Halloween trilogy serves as a direct sequel to the 1978 original slasher, with a number of OG actors reprising their roles. It's the 13th installment in the Halloween franchise. Ooh, number 13, huh? The film is set to star the Queen of Screams herself, the legendary Jamie Lee Curtis, Will Patton, Kyle Richards, to name a few. Definitely some peeps reprising the roles from other Halloweens. I see that. I can't wait for this. Most of us have known this franchise, universe, multiverse, whatever you want to call it, our whole lives. Fast walks and jump scares. It's coming to a theater near you very soon, actually. In June 2018, before the release of Halloween 2018, McBride confirmed that he and Green had intended to pitch 2 films that would be shot back to back, but decided against it, waiting to see how the first film was perceived. In 2019, the film's title was announced along with Halloween Kills. The film will be produced by Jason Blum with Blumhouse Productions alongside Rough House, Miramax, and Trancas. Halloween Ends is scheduled to be released October 14th, 2022 by Universal Pictures. It will also stream simultaneously on Peacock for 60 days. I love these movies, man. The acting alone, like how do they act so scared? It's so believable. Just screaming all day, take after take, that's a lot of tea with honey and lemon, isn't it? Less is more always, and I'll definitely be having a night filled with chips, dips, and lots of hands in my face blocking the screen, you know? I'll do my best, but that's how I watch scary movies, just like I can't see it at all. I'm a huge chicken, I'm not gonna lie. Number 4, Hellraiser. The Hellraiser franchise is back with this sci-fi supernatural horror we all love, which includes 4 films, 6 straight-to-home video films, various comic books and media, all based around the novella by English author Clive Barker titled The Hellbound Heart. The franchise centers around the Cenobites, including the primary antagonist we all love and fear, the infamous Pinhead. Next month, Hellraiser's back. The The film is directed by David Bruckner, with screenplay by Ben Collins and Luke Petrowski from a story that they wrote with David Goyer. This project is intended to serve as a reimagining of Clive Barker's 1987 film and the 11th installment of the Hellraiser franchise. The film will follow closely to the source material novella written by Barker, The Hellbound Heart, and the film is going to star Odessa A'zion and Jamie Clayton, and is a co-production from the 20th Century Studios, Spyglass Media, and Phantom 4 Films. Plans for a Hellraiser remake was in talks in 2007, however, following the release of Hellraiser Revelations, to secure the rights, they had to hold off a bit. By 2018, after the critical and commercial success of Halloween, Miramax Films confirmed plans of a new Hellraiser project, including a prequel and reboot. The film was greenlit in 2019, with Bruckner directing a script written by Collins and Petrowski, and shooting began September 2021. Hellraiser is scheduled to be released exclusively on Hulu as a Hulu original film this October 7th, 2022. I'm not gonna lie, this looks awesome. I wonder how they had to sit through all the hair and makeup though, you know? Trish trying to drink a coffee, but you can't reach your own face. I made a wicked Hellraiser mask for Halloween one year, you know? Just a Jabberwocky's mask, smashed a bunch of nails right through it. Did the trick. Number 3, Dark Harvest. This looks pretty dark and twisted. Dark Harvest is an American upcoming fantasy horror film directed by David Slade and written by Michael Gillio based on the 2006 novel of the same name by Norman Partridge. Scheduled to be released in theaters September 9th, 2022. In early 2019, it was reported New Regency hired David Slade to direct the adaptation of Dark Harvest, with Michael Gillio writing the script and Mac Tolmack and David Mamperl producing. We know some of Slade's movies already, such as Hard Candy, Twilight Eclipse, and Bandersnatch. Great films, you know? Great shots. The plot, here we go. Every fall in a small Midwestern town, a supernatural specter named Sawtooth Jack arises from the cornfields and approaches the town's church, where violent gangs of young boys hungrily await their chance to confront the legendary nightmare in an annual harvest rite of life and death. Richie Shepard lives in the shadow of his big brother, who won last year's October prize to get his ticket out of town. To prove to himself and his brother, Richie pairs up with the relentless dreamer Kelly Haynes, who will do whatever it takes to escape this dead-end town. Against the rules and against the odds, Richie and Kelly decide to hunt down the legendary nightmare themselves together. Okay, this sounds different. The nickname really shook me though, you know? Sawtooth Jack. Like, first and last names are scary enough sometimes. You don't need a visceral nickname from a cornfield, you know? Very terrifying. I guess we're gonna see this Jack Skellington meets Children of the Corn nightmare in the next couple of weeks, actually. Looks pretty awesome. The concept art alone. Very terrifying. Number 2, Jeepers Creepers Reborn. One of my favorite horror universes. These movies have kept me awake many, many hours. And, well, here we go again. Jeepers Creepers Reborn is an upcoming American horror film directed by Timo Vuorensola in his Hollywood debut. Written by Sean Michael Argo, it is the 4th film and a reboot in the Jeepers Creepers film series, meant to serve as the first in a planned trilogy set apart from Victor Salva's original trilogy. Okay, so same concept, different vision. I got it. We have a Snyder Cut. I get it. The film is scheduled to be released in the US September 19th, 2022 by Screen Media Films. Now, for the plot. The Horror Hound Festival is being held for the first time in Louisiana. Among the attendees are Chase and his girlfriend Lane, who begins to experience unexplained premonitions and disturbing visions associated with the town's past and the infamous Creeper. Principal photography started shooting in Jackson, Louisiana. Soon after, however, the production was moved to the UK due to the pandemic. Filming in the UK was split into 2 parts, the first in November 2020 at Black Hanger Studios and finished on December. The second filming chunk took place between January and February 2021. The title was officially confirmed as Jeepers Creepers Reborn in February 2021 when Screen Media Films acquired the rights in the US and Canada. At the 2021 European film market, Foresight Unlimited showed a promotional reel of footage for the international sales, and apparently it was pretty scary. Yeah, I can't wait for this one. I love these movies. They're campy, they're cheesy, they're absolutely terrifying. True story, my sister and I were watching the first one as kids and a giant moth flew in front of the porch light. Yeah, just like a 40-foot winged shadow on the wall. All of a sudden, mid-movie. Yeah, that'll keep you up. And number 1, we have Smile. Okay, this one looks the scariest by far, and I'm not sure if it's in the budget or it's just the neighborhood that I live in, but everyone smiles like this, you know? I'm looking forward to watching this, but I don't want to see it, you know? Smile is an upcoming American psychological horror film written and directed by Parker Finn in his feature film debut. It's based on his 2020 short film, Laura Hasn't Slept. Gonna rename that to Kyle Hasn't Slept after watching this one 100%. Yeah. The film stars Sosie Bacon, Jesse T. Usher, Kyle Gallner, Caitlin Kevin Spacey, Cal Penn, and Rob Morgan. Smile will have its world premiere at Fantastic Fest on September 22nd, 2022, and is scheduled to be released in the US September 30th, 2022 by Paramount Pictures. Alright, so we'll get a better idea in the next couple of weekends. Also, which movie do you think of when you see the Paramount logo? You know what I mean? Mine's Grease. Every time I see it, I just feel like Grease Lightning's coming up. I don't know. Okay, now the plot. After witnessing a bizarre traumatic incident involving a patient, Dr. Rose Cotter starts experiencing frightening occurrences that she can't explain. Rose must confront her troubling past in order to survive and escape her horrifying new reality. The short film won the Special Jury Recognition Prize for South by Southwest's Midnight Short category. In September 2021, the film was announced under a different title, however, of Something's Wrong. Shooting began October 11th in New Jersey and finished in November. Okay, so a nice little quick turnaround, you know? They had like a one take kind of day. Yo, imagine walking around and everyone's just smiling like Mr. Burns at you all day. That's horrifying. I think I would just bird box myself and just blindfold up, you know? Just start swinging. Yeah, this looks great. I can't wait. I watched the trailer and then I started seeing people smiling at me on the way home. You know what I mean? Terrifying.